I don't remember the first lie she told about me. Maybe it was something small, like forgetting to mention she'd spent the night out. Or maybe it was when she told her sister I'd been controlling, that I'd watch over her phone, that I'd sniff her clothes for someone else's scent. Lies can start like hairline cracks in glass, invisible at first, until the whole window shatters under pressure. The courtroom was cold the day she accused me of everything, every sin a man could commit. I sat there in my suit, fingers stiff and pale against the wood of the table, listening to her voice echo off the marble walls. She painted me as a monster, violent, manipulative, an emotional terrorist. The judge kept glancing at me, his brow folded like a closed fist, while my lawyer squeezed my arm under the table as if trying to keep me from drowning Dot. But what no one knew, not my family sitting in disbelief behind me, not her friends who avoided my eyes in the hallway, was that tucked away in my phone, buried under dozens of voicemails and junk mail, was a recording. A stupid, accidental recording. Something I hadn't remembered until the day the world decided I was guilty before I could speak. I still remember the smell of lemon-scented cleaner in the courtroom, how it stung my nostrils and mixed with the stale perfume of people who'd been sitting there too long. My suit felt a size too small, as though my ribs were shrinking in fear. I glanced at her while she spoke, and I saw the faintest tremor in her hand as she held the tissue to her cheek. She was always a decent actress. She cried without letting the tears fall. Her voice caught at just the right syllable to sound fragile. I used to be the man who held her when she cried like that. Now I was the reason for her tears. The judge called a recess, and I stumbled outside, trying to breathe. The California sun was bright enough to slice my skull open, but I welcomed the sting of it, the warmth searing into the cold place I'd been pushed into. I leaned against the concrete wall, eyes shut, and listened to the distant rumble of traffic, the soft shuffle of people passing. I kept hearing her words repeating in my skull, like nails tapping a glass table. He threatened me. He said he'd ruin me if I left him. I was scared for my life. It's strange how quickly your world can vanish. Friends stop calling. Family stops asking how you're doing. Even my own mother looked at me like she didn't recognize my face. The loneliness became so heavy, it felt like carrying a second body on my back. Nights were the worst, lying there in my empty bed, staring at the ceiling fan whirring slowly above me, my chest tight as though invisible hands were pressing me down. I started forgetting what my own voice sounded like. Sometimes I'd wonder if maybe I was this monster she claimed. Gaslighting, they called it, making someone question their own reality. But she was the one gaslighting me. I'd say something happened one way. She'd swear it happened another, until I couldn't trust my own memory. And when I fought back, she'd cry, and suddenly I was the aggressor. I began to hate the sound of my own anger, so I learned to speak softly, to choose my words like I was disarming a bomb. But it didn't matter. Eventually, the bomb went off anyway. Standing there outside the courthouse, my throat raw, I scrolled through my phone, not even sure what I was looking for. Maybe a message from someone who believed me. A scrap of proof that I hadn't imagined the whole life we'd built together. That's when I saw the file. A voice memo labeled only with a date from 6 months ago. I didn't remember recording anything that day. My finger hovered over it, shaking. I pressed play, and suddenly I was back in our living room. Her voice filled my ears, sweet and silky. They'll believe me, you know. I'll tell them you hit me, that you threatened to kill yourself if I left. I'll cry in court. You'll lose everything. Then my voice, trembling. Why would you do that? To me? A soft laugh. Because I can. Because I know how to play innocent. And you're so easy to make look guilty. My knees buckled. I pressed the phone to my ear as though trying to crawl into it, needing to hear every word, to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Her voice was so casual, so sure of herself. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She was planning how to destroy me. People were streaming past me on the sidewalk, sunlight bouncing off windshields, the hot breeze carrying faint smells of exhaust and coffee. It all felt distant, unreal, like I was behind glass. A woman bumped into my shoulder, apologized, and kept walking. I wanted to scream after her. Did you hear this? Do you hear what she's done? But I said nothing. My whole body felt numb. I looked back at the courthouse entrance, the towering columns casting long shadows across the steps. And in that moment, I realized two things. 1, I wasn't crazy. 2, if I played this right, the truth might just save me. I didn't go back into the courthouse right away. I couldn't. I stood outside, gripping the phone so hard my fingers cramped, the recording still echoing in my skull. People passed around me in waves, their conversations awash of meaningless words. A seagull screeched overhead, and the sun seemed to press down on my scalp like a hot iron. For a moment, I wanted to run. Get in my car, drive north up the 101, keep going until California was nothing but a memory. But the thought of leaving felt like handing her the final piece of me. No, I'd lost enough already. Instead, I slipped my phone back into my pocket and forced myself to breathe, slowly, carefully, the kind of breathing I'd learned in therapy, back when I thought therapy could save my marriage. Back when I thought I was the problem. It's strange how marriage sneaks up on you. One day you're in love, willing to die for someone. The next, you're charting the shape of your wounds, wondering how much blood you can lose before you're empty. I'd met Erin in Santa Barbara at a friend's backyard party. She'd been wearing a red sundress, laughing at something I couldn't. Here, hair shining in the twilight like spilled honey. I fell in love with her laugh first. It had a brightness that made people turn their heads, wanting to be closer to whatever lit her up inside. She'd leaned into me that first night, touching my arm, her perfume soft and floral, and said, "You look like someone who needs saving." And I'd laughed, thinking it was a joke. But even then, a part of me wondered if she'd meant it. She liked projects. And I was a man who thought love was supposed to hurt a little at first. Things were good, better than good. I'd catch her watching me across a room with a softness in her eyes that made me feel like the luckiest man alive. She'd plan elaborate weekend trips, cabins in Big Bear, wineries in Paso Robles, romantic hotels with fireplaces, and those silly heart-shaped bathtubs. She always made me feel chosen. Special. Then came the little tests. Innocent at first. She'd leave her phone out with cryptic messages on the screen, watching my reaction. She'd tell me stories about coworkers flirting with her, waiting to see if I'd get jealous. When I tried not to, she'd accuse me of not loving her enough. When I did, she'd call me controlling. It was like navigating a minefield where every step exploded, no matter how gently I moved. The first time she said she might leave me, we'd been married 3 years. I remember the day because it was raining in Los Angeles, which always felt like a bad omen. I'd come home late from work, my shirt soaked through, and found her sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She didn't look at me as she spoke. "I don't know if I can do this anymore." Those words gutted me. I'd tried to fix things. Therapy, dates, long vulnerable talks at 3 a.m., but it never mattered. Nothing I did was enough. And each time she threatened to leave, I felt my grip on reality slip a little more. It was always my fault. I was too emotional, too cold, too insecure, too controlling, always too something. The real fracture happened the night she accused me of grabbing her wrist. We'd been arguing in the kitchen. She'd been screaming that I was suffocating her, that I was trying to keep her from her friends, from her family. I'd tried to walk away, but she'd blocked my path, her face inches from mine. I'd touched her arm, lightly, I swear to God, just to move past her. She'd yanked away, eyes wide, then bolted into the bedroom and locked the door. Next morning, she told me I'd hurt her, that I'd grabbed her so hard her skin would bruise. She wore long sleeves for a week, even though it was July in Los Angeles. She cried when anyone asked why, and she started dropping words like restraining order, emotional abuse, domestic violence. I started believing her story more than I believed my own memories. In court, she'd replayed that moment for the judge, her voice trembling, a single tear catching the light on her cheek. She said I'd slammed her into the counter, that I'd screamed in her face, spit flying, that she'd been afraid for her life, and people believed her. Of course they did. She looked so small and delicate beside me, and I looked like a man who'd lost too much sleep and couldn't remember how to smile. I didn't even remember that the phone had been on the kitchen counter, recording the whole thing. I'd been trying to dictate a work email that day and must have hit record by accident. And now, months later, the proof was sitting in my pocket, my salvation waiting like a loaded gun dot. As I finally turned to go back inside the courthouse, I felt something strange bubbling up in my chest. It wasn't fear, or even relief. It was anger, not the explosive kind that breaks plates or punches holes in drywall. A cold, coiled anger, a kind that waits. I walked through security again, the guard giving me a bored look as my belt buckle set off the scanner. I wanted to tell him everything, show him the recording, but I stayed silent. There was a bigger picture forming in my head, a pattern I hadn't fully seen before. Because if Erin had planned this lie, what else had she planned? Who else was in on it? And how far would she go to keep the truth buried? I sat down beside my lawyer, leaning in close. "There's something you need to hear," I whispered. He glanced at me, startled, as the bailiff called the courtroom back into session. My lawyer's name is David Koenig. Short guy, bald on top, with these sharp blue eyes that miss nothing. He's the kind of man who looks mild until he opens his mouth and slices your opponent to ribbons with polite words. When I whispered about the recording, he froze for a second, then lowered his voice so only I could hear. "You're sure about this? It's her. It's all on tape." He stared at me for another beat, then gave a single nod, like a chess player deciding on his next move. But the judge was already back on the bench, and Erin was adjusting her blouse, eyes wet and red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying into her lawyer's shoulder during the recess. I wondered if it ever exhausted her, keeping up the performance, or if it came as naturally to her as breathing. The court reporter was back at her little machine, fingers flying. The sound reminded me of rain pattering on a rooftop. For a second, I was back in our apartment, lying awake at 3 a.m., listening to the rain while Erin slept beside me, breathing softly. It's terrifying how quickly a good memory can turn into something poisonous. David rose from his seat, his voice steady. "Your Honor, the defense has newly discovered evidence that we believe is crucial to these proceedings. May we approach?" Erin's eyes darted toward me, and in that instant, something shifted, a flicker of panic, quickly hidden. Her lawyer leaned into her, whispering urgently. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly, but I saw it, and I realized that for the first time in months, the fear wasn't mine. It was hers. The judge frowned. "Approach, counsel." David handed over my phone. He'd already queued up the recording. I sat there, muscles tight, listening as the judge pressed play. Erin's voice spilled into the hushed courtroom speakers. "They'll believe me, you know. I'll tell them you hit me, that you threatened to kill yourself if I left. I'll cry in court, You'll lose everything." My own voice followed, shaky. "Why would you do that to me?" Aaron's laugh, soft, chilling. "Because I can, because I know how to play innocent. And you're so easy to make look guilty." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the clock ticking high on the wall behind the judge's bench. Aaron's lawyer closed his eyes like he'd just been punched in the gut. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like my chest might split open. But I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I met her eyes, I'd see the woman I fell in love with, not the stranger who tried to destroy me. That the judge cleared his throat. "We'll recess until tomorrow morning. Counsel, both of you, in chambers." And just like that, the courtroom emptied. The bailiff ushered everyone out. I found myself standing in the hallway, leaning against the cool marble wall, still gripping the phone in my pocket like a lifeline. People moved past me in hushed clusters, eyes flicking toward me and then away again. Erin was nowhere in sight. She'd vanished behind the heavy wood door to the judge's chambers. Her lawyer at her elbow. David came back out half an hour later, face flushed, tie loosened. He looked at me with a cautious relief. "They're going to review the recording. It's serious enough that the judge might dismiss your petition altogether, maybe even look at charges for perjury." I swallowed, my throat so dry it felt like sandpaper. "So, that's it? She doesn't win. Not yet. Don't get ahead of yourself. She's not going to go down without a fight." He paused, voice lowering. "And there's something else. Her lawyer's hinting there may be financial fraud involved. Property, accounts, things you might not know about." My stomach flipped over. "Fraud?" David nodded. "If she's willing to lie in court, she might have been hiding money, assets. We'll start digging." I felt like I was watching my own life from outside my body. Everything that had been solid, my marriage, my reputation, my sense of who I was, had turned liquid beneath my feet. And now, on top of all of it, I was supposed to untangle bank accounts and hidden money. A sudden memory rose in my mind, sharp as broken glass. Erin sitting at the dining table, hunched over her laptop, typing fast. She'd snap it shut the moment I entered the room, smiling too wide. "Just bills," she'd say. Boring stuff. I'd believed her. God help me, I'd believed everything. David rested a hand briefly on my shoulder. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be rough." But rest was impossible. That night, I lay in bed in my small apartment, the ceiling fan turning above me, shadows spinning across the walls. I kept hearing Erin's voice on the recording, her laugh, that cool confidence. I stared at the glow of my phone on the nightstand, afraid to close my eyes, because every time I did, I dreamed of her face morphing from soft and loving to cold and venomous. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I started replaying the past year in my head, piece by piece. All the strange bank statements she'd brushed off. All the late nights she'd claimed were girls' nights out. The way she'd suddenly insisted we refinance the house. Things that hadn't made sense started fitting together like puzzle pieces snapping into place. And a question began, circling in my mind, refusing to let me sleep. Had she planned this entire thing for longer than I ever realized? By dawn, I was still awake. The edges of my vision felt frayed, like fabric worn thin. A pale strip of sunlight slipped through the blinds, tracing lines across the floor, as if trying to divide my life into before and after. There was no clean break, just an endless tangle of memories, doubts, and her voice repeating over and over in my skull. "They'll believe me, you know." I rolled out of bed and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection stared back at me from the bathroom mirror, eyes bloodshot, cheeks hollow. I barely recognized the man there. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was the look of someone who'd lived for months under siege, always waiting for the next accusation, the next emotional ambush. I thought about all the ways Aaron had cornered me over the years. The silent treatments, the public tears when I tried to defend myself, the whispered threats behind closed doors, and how each time I'd caved, apologizing for things I hadn't done, just to keep the peace. It was like being trapped in a hall of mirrors, never sure which reflection was true. But that morning, something different stirred inside me. The fear was still there, coiling in my gut like a snake, but wrapped around it was a cold determination. I couldn't let her win. Not after everything she'd taken. Not after the recording. I called David as soon as the clock hit 8. I can't just wait around, I told him. I want to know what she's hiding. He sighed on the other end. I figured you'd say that. I've got a private investigator. Lined up. Ex-cop. Good reputation. We'll look into bank accounts, credit cards, property records. I hesitated. What if there's nothing? David was quiet for a moment. Then at least you'll know the truth. Either way, you'll have your life back. And that's worth fighting for. I hung up and stared at my phone. My thumb hovered over Erin's number. A year ago, I would have called her first thing in the morning, just to hear her voice. Now, the thought made me feel sick. Instead, threw on jeans and a sweatshirt, and drove aimlessly through Los Angeles. The city felt unreal, like a movie set. Palm trees swayed against a perfect blue sky. People jogged along the sidewalks, earbuds in, lost in music. Traffic honked and surged at intersections. And here I was, driving past all of it, wondering how many other stories like mine were hidden behind the cheerful sunshine. I ended up parking outside our old house in West L.A. I don't even remember deciding to go there. The place looked smaller than I remembered, the beige stucco cracked in places, the grass going brown along the edges of the lawn. Erin's SUV was gone. For a moment, I wondered if she was still living there at all, or if she'd fled somewhere, new to spin her next story. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Memories slammed into me from all sides. The two of us painting that front door navy blue one Sunday afternoon, Erin laughing as she flicked paint onto my shirt. The Christmas lights we'd strung along the roof, only to have half of them go dark the night before our holiday party. The way she'd sit on the front steps drinking iced coffee, waving at neighbors, looking for all the world like the perfect wife. And behind all of it, the fights, the accusations. The way she'd hiss venom in my ear when no one was listening. They'll believe me. A sudden flash of memory hit me so hard I almost gasped. Erin on the phone late at night, whispering, pacing in the kitchen. She'd claimed she was talking to her mother about girl stuff. But once I'd caught a name, Matthew, and she'd turned on me like a cornered animal when I asked about it. Don't you trust me? She'd shrieked, "You're paranoid. You're ruining this marriage." I'd backed off, terrified of being the monster she said I was. But now, sitting outside our old house, I remembered the way she'd kept glancing at the windows, as if worried someone might overhear. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my old cell records. Back then, I'd saved our shared account PDFs like some dutiful husband. And there it was, dozens of late-night calls to the same number. Matthew.my. Pulse thundered in my ears. I copied the number and texted it to David. Look into this. Might be connected. I didn't go knock on the door. I couldn't face whatever lay behind that navy blue paint. Instead, I drove away, weaving through LA traffic, heart slamming. So hard it made my chest ache. By the time I reached David's office, the investigator was already there. A woman named Trish. Short hair, blazer, a stare that could peel paint off walls. She gave me a once-over and said, So you finally want to know the truth about your wife. I nodded, feeling like a man about to jump out of a plane without a parachute. Trish smiled, wolfish. Buckle up. We're going digging. That afternoon was a blur of paperwork, account numbers, and whispered theories. Trish found strange cash withdrawals, a hidden P.O. box in Culver City, an offshore wire transfer to a bank in the Cayman Islands. And all of it pointed to one chilling possibility. Erin hadn't just wanted to ruin me emotionally. She'd been preparing to disappear with a pile of money that belonged to both of us. As the sun dipped low behind L.A.'s skyline, David leaned across his desk and said, "This isn't just a messy divorce anymore. She's running a scheme, and you might not be her first victim." I stared at him, feeling my throat close up, because suddenly I realized this wasn't just about saving my reputation, Doc. It was about stopping Erin before she ruined someone else the way she'd nearly ruined me. That night, I barely slept. Again, my brain kept replaying Trish's words on a loop. She might not be your first victim. I kept thinking about every man I'd ever seen Erin charm. The barista at our coffee shop who gave her free oat milk upgrades. The real estate agent who'd given her his card with his personal cell number scrawled across the back. And Matthew, the man whose name she'd hissed at me for daring to question. Had she done this before? Found men who trusted her, wrapped them around her finger, and bled them dry before moving on? By the time morning came, my hands were trembling as I poured coffee into a mug. It tasted bitter, metallic, like everything else in my life lately. Trish. And David called me in early. We met in David's cramped conference room, blinds drawn against the morning glare. Papers were spread across the table, rows of bank statements, printouts from public records, screenshots of text messages. Trish leaned over the table, tapping her pen against one document. "Look at this. 3 years ago, there's a joint account. She opened with another man. Name's Matthew Coulson. Nearly $80,000 went in and vanished overseas. He filed for bankruptcy last year. Never pressed charges. I felt my stomach twist. So she's done this before." Trish's gaze was steely. "It's a pattern. She gets close, isolates the guy, fabricates abuse claims, so she has leverage if he fights back. And in the chaos of the divorce, she funnels money out and disappears." I shook my head. "But why me? We were happy, at least in the beginning." David sighed. "Because you were stable, a decent job, a good credit score, someone she could make look guilty if things went south." I slumped back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles. I remembered the first time Erin came to my office for lunch, bringing Thai food in a brown paper bag. She'd kissed me in front of my coworkers, laughing, making everyone envious of how in love we looked. And all the while, maybe she'd already been plotting. I felt like a man who'd been living in someone else's fiction. David cleared his throat. "We have enough to request a forensic accounting investigation, and we'll subpoena Matthew if we have to." Trish added, "The judge is going to see a pattern of fraud, not just he said, she said. That's how we beat her." But even as they talked strategy, I couldn't shake the image of Erin smiling at me over candlelight dinners, or curling into my chest when she had nightmares. I kept asking myself, was any of it real? Or was I just a mark in her con game? Around noon, Trish got a call. She stepped out of the room, and David and I sat in silence. A few minutes later, she came back in, eyes glittering. "That was my contact at the bank," she said. "She tried moving another 20 grand this morning. Different account, offshore." David swore under his breath. "She knows he's cornered." Trish gave me a hard look. "We can either let her keep running, or we can push her into making a mistake." "How?" I whispered. "Talk to her," Trish said. Play the loving husband one last time. Let her think you're wavering. Give her enough rope. The thought made me sick. Pretending affection for the woman who tried to annihilate me felt like lying to my own soul. But I knew Trish was right. Erin was like a shark. She only panicked when blood hit the water. So that night, I called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft and cautious. Hello? I tried to keep my tone calm, neutral. Erin, we need to talk. A tiny hitch in her breathing. About what? I just want this to end. I don't want to fight anymore. I'm tired. Maybe we can figure out a way to settle. This quietly. A silence stretched between us. And she said, so sweetly it made my teeth ache, I never wanted to hurt you. You know that, right? I nearly laughed, a raw, bitter sound. But I caught myself. Of course, I know. Another pause. Maybe we can meet, just the two of us. No lawyers. I swallowed hard. Sure. Where? She named a coffee shop in Culver City. I agreed, then hung up, my fingers cold and damp on the phone. Trish was waiting outside my apartment in her car. I slipped into the passenger seat and told her everything. She nodded grimly. We'll be there. You won't be alone. The next morning, I walked into the cafe, my heart hammering so loud I felt dizzy. The place smelled of espresso and cinnamon, sunlight pouring through big glass windows. Erin was already there, sitting in the corner, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, stirring a latte she hadn't touched. She looked beautiful and deadly. I sat down across from her, my skin prickling as she reached across the table to touch my hand. I hate that we're enemies, she said, voice trembling just enough. I miss us. I miss how we used to be. I almost believed her. God help me, some part of me still wanted to, but I forced myself to say, I miss you too. But there are things I've learned, things we need to talk about. A flicker of fear crossed her face. What things? I leaned closer. The offshore accounts. Matthew. The recording. Her eyes went wide, and for the first time, I saw real panic. She snatched her hand back as though I'd burned her. You don't understand, I interrupted. Softly. I think I finally do. I felt movement behind me. Trish and David were stepping closer, silent shadows. Erin's gaze darted around the cafe like a trapped animal, and in that moment, I realized the woman who'd held my heart for years was unraveling right in front of me. She tried to stand, but Trish blocked her path. Erin's chair scraped the tile floor as she sank back down, eyes wide, chest rising and falling like she couldn't get enough air. Her voice dropped to a sharp whisper. You set me up. I swallowed. Hard. My pulse was thudding so loud it felt like my entire body was vibrating. No, you set yourself up the moment you decided to lie about me. Her lips trembled. They'll believe me. They always do. I leaned in, keeping my voice low so only she could hear. Not this time. They heard the recording. They know about the offshore transfers. About Matthew. I saw it hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes glistened, and for a split second, I glimpsed the girl I'd fallen in love with, the girl in the red sundress in Santa Barbara, laughing under the fairy lights. But then her expression hardened, a mask snapping back into place. You don't know what you're talking about, she spat. This is all your fault. You pushed me to this. You're controlling, obsessed. I cut her off. Stop, please, just stop. Her voice rose, trembling on the edge of hysteria. You don't get to do this to me. You don't get to ruin my life. Trish stepped closer, speaking calmly. Ma'am, we have evidence of financial fraud. We're going to need you to come with us. Erin's eyes filled with tears. But it wasn't sadness. It was fury. You think you're so clever, she hissed at me. But none of this would have happened if you just loved me enough. My throat closed. I wanted to scream that I'd loved her with everything I had, that I'd bent myself into knots, trying to keep her happy. But I realized in that moment that nothing would ever have been enough. For her, love was a weapon, a way to gain power. Trish leaned forward. I'd advise you to stop talking, Erin. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Erin blinked at Trish as though seeing her for the first time. Then she looked back at me, eyes brimming with something like genuine grief. I never meant for it to go this far. For a heartbeat, I almost believed her. Then I remembered recording the way she'd laughed about how easily she could destroy me. David slipped into the seat beside me. The police are on their way. We've already called them. Erin sagged back in her chair, her entire body deflating. Her shoulders shook as silent tears fell. The cafe seemed to hush around us. I noticed people staring, whispers floating through the air like dust motes. Coffee machines hissed in the background. The sweet scent of cinnamon mixed with the sharp tongue of espresso. I felt oddly empty, like I'd been carrying a boulder on my chest for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. Now that it was gone, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Erin was still sobbing softly when two uniformed LAPD officers arrived. They approached our table with careful professionalism. One of them read her rights. The other gently pulled her to her feet and guided her toward the door. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just kept crying, shoulders hunched, eyes vacant dot as they led her away. She turned to look at me one last time. Her lips moved around my name, but no sound came out. Then she was gone. I sat there in the silence she left behind, staring into the swirl of coffee in my cup. Trish and David hovered nearby, speaking quietly to each other, but I barely heard them. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from my mom. Heard about the recording. Proud of you. Come home soon? I swallowed a sudden lump in my throat. I stepped outside into the late morning sun, the sky a brilliant, indifferent blue. Traffic roared around me, and I felt the wind brush my face, cool and crisp. I closed my eyes and let the breeze wash over me, for the first time in what felt like forever. I wasn't waiting for the next attack. I wasn't crafting my words like a bomb disposal expert, terrified of setting her off. I was just The days that followed were a blur of police statements, legal paperwork, and cautious conversations with friends and family. It turned out Erin had started funneling money out of our accounts months before she filed for divorce. Trish found enough evidence to link her to a pattern of similar schemes, Matthew included. The DI was considering charges for fraud, and perjury. My case was dismissed completely. The judge even offered a formal statement, clearing my name, but the scars remained. People kept telling me how lucky I was, how vindicated I must feel. But vindication didn't erase the nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was the monster she said I was. It didn't erase the way my mother looked at me during the trial, eyes clouded with uncertainty. Or how I still flinched when I heard someone raise their voice in a cafe. Still, I was free. And that counted for something. Months later, I drove up the coast, back to Santa Barbara. I stood on the same beach where I'd first met Erin. The sun dipped low, painting the ocean pink and gold. I let the wind whip my hair, the salt sharp on my tongue, and I said goodbye to the woman I'd loved and the illusions I'd built around her. Still don't know if Erin ever truly loved me. Maybe, in her own way, she did. But love twisted into control isn't love at all. And I finally understand that I'm not who she said I was. I'm still piecing myself together. But for the first time in years, I'm hopeful. And that's enough. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Click the video on the screen, and I'll see you there.